It's just turned midnight in the Russian capital of St. Petersburg. The streets are empty, and with temperatures below freezing, most of the city has gone to sleep. But at a royal palace in the center of the city, a party is being planned. A party for just one person. The special guest is on his way and will be arriving in just a few minutes. Meanwhile, back at the palace, cakes and wine are being carefully laced with poison. The guest was headed straight for a trap. That night, a gang of high society men carried out an elaborate plan to kill and dispose of Rasputin, the famous mystical healer who had become the most hated man in Russia. We'll show you why he was killed and the play-by-play timeline of his assassination. Very few people have lived a crazier life than Grigori Rasputin. He went from being a poor peasant who couldn't read or write to being a godlike saint surrounded by royalty and power. But to really understand why he became so hated, we need to go back to the beginning. Rasputin grew up in a small farming village in Siberia and lived a pretty normal life. He worked on the farm, got married, and had children. It was an ordinary existence in an ordinary place. But at the age of 28, something changed in Rasputin's life. Religion took over. Suddenly, he left his town and family behind to go on a pilgrimage. Wandering from town to town, he started developing a small circle of followers who prayed with him and listened to him preach. Everywhere he went, priests and villagers were captivated by his charisma and his unique ability to heal people. Rasputin continued walking all across Russia, claiming to heal people's illnesses. By 1905, he had earned a godlike reputation. This reputation finally led him all the way to the top, when the Empress of Russia asked him to heal her son, who had been suffering from hemophilia, a dangerous blood condition. Despite the boy's serious condition, Rasputin took away his medication, began praying for him, and miraculously, he got better. Whatever he had done, it earned him the trust of the most powerful woman in the country. The Empress became close friends with Rasputin, often depending on him for his wise advice. In just a handful of years, Rasputin's holy reputation had taken him from the bottom of society all the way to the top, into the inner circle of imperial power itself. But Rasputin's divine, supernatural image had a dark side that few were willing to acknowledge publicly. Rasputin was an alcoholic. He partied constantly and had ongoing affairs with his followers. In 1915, police set up a secret surveillance team and started following his day-to-day activities. On February 19th, Rasputin was seen coming out of a building with two ladies. He didn't return home until 3 o'clock in the morning. On March 10th, police followed him through the city and saw him meeting up with a prostitute. On May 12th, Rasputin brought a different prostitute back to his flat and locked her in a room until a servant set her free. Almost every other day, Rasputin was seen coming home with prostitutes and his own female followers having drunken parties and singing from his apartment. Despite his wild life, he remained close friends with the Empress, and this brought him an immense amount of power. So much so that Rasputin started making his own political decisions, appointing new ministers and giving advice on the war itself. He had become the shadow power behind the Russian throne. The public was turning on Rasputin. To many people across Russia, the Tsar and the Empress had become puppets being controlled by the evil and corrupt Rasputin. At the time, the media wasn't allowed to report on this, but as tensions grew higher and higher, newspapers were willingly paying censorship fines just to write about Rasputin's influence over Russia. All of this anger finally came to a breaking point. In November 1916, when politician Vladimir Purishkevich stood up in the Russian parliament with a shocking denunciation. Although many across the country felt the same way, no one had expressed their hatred of Rasputin so openly until now. The words hung in the air like a challenge, a call to action. In the audience that day was Felix Yusupov. Despite being part of the royal family himself, he despised everything Rasputin stood for. To him, Rasputin was the devil, and he had to be taken out in order to save Russia. Just a week later, Yusupov and Purishkevich met on board Purishkevich's private train, parked at a nearby train station. Yusupov had brought along Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, the Tsar's own cousin, an old military friend, Dr. Lazovert, and a loyal soldier, Lieutenant Sergei Sukhotin. That evening, the five men came up with a grand plan to lure Rasputin in and kill him. Here's how they planned to do it. On the chosen night, the gang would meet at Yusupov's palace in the center of the city. At precisely 1 a.m., Yusupov would go to pick up Rasputin, driven by Dr. Lazovert, who would be dressed as a chauffeur. When they got back to the palace, Dr. Lazovert would park close to the entrance in such a way as to hide Rasputin from the street. They knew that Rasputin had 3 security agencies protecting him, so it was likely that spies would be keeping an eye on his every move. Once inside, Dr. Lazovert would join the rest of the gang in a room upstairs, while Yusupov and Rasputin would go down to the basement, which the gang had converted into a lavish dining room. Here, the thick concrete walls would stop any screams or gunshots from being heard outside the palace. During the party, Yusupov would offer Rasputin various cakes and wines that had been laced with powerful cyanide poison. If all went well, Rasputin would be dead in just 15 minutes. To get rid of any evidence, the gang would then drive to Purishkevich's train, burn Rasputin's clothes, and park the car on the cargo wagon, ready to leave St. Petersburg later that night. They would then walk through the city to another car and drive back to the crime scene. Finally, they would wrap up Rasputin's body, drive to a nearby bridge, and throw him into the icy river, hopefully never to be seen again. But all of this would only happen if Rasputin agreed to come to the party in the first place. They needed a way to lure him in. And so, Yusupov started faking chest pains and went to Rasputin for his healing powers. Throughout the month, the two met up several times, and Yusupov managed to become Rasputin's friend. With every meeting, Rasputin always asked to meet Yusupov's wife, the beautiful 21-year-old Irina. Yusupov was never going to let Rasputin anywhere near his wife, but it did give him an idea. He told Rasputin that Irina would be throwing a party with her friends on December 29th and invited Rasputin to come and meet her. Rasputin, being the ultimate ladies' man, couldn't resist. The plan was set. It was a particularly cold evening, and by 11 p.m., the streets were empty. It was time to start the party. Purishkevich left his train at 11:15 and nervously waited to be picked up. At 11:50, 20 minutes later than planned, Dr. Lazovert pulled up beside him. According to their plan, the gates at the side entrance were to be open at a specific time, but by the time they arrived, the gates were closed. To avoid raising any suspicion, they kept driving and slowly circled back a few minutes later, but the gates were still closed. Purishkevich got out and entered through the main entrance on foot, while Dr. Lazovert drove around until the gates were finally opened. They met the 3 other men in the dining room, where a large table was filled with pink cakes and other delights. Rasputin had told Yusupov that his spies didn't leave his apartment until just after midnight, so the gang had some time to kill before picking him up. Dr. Lazarvert took this opportunity to start separating the cakes and grating the powerful cyanide poison into the cream layers. Then he poured several glasses of red wine and laced them too. Meanwhile, back at his apartment, Rasputin was getting ready for the party. For him, it was going to be another good night. Although he had agreed not to tell anyone where he was going that night, he couldn't keep it in and ended up telling his daughter and his secretary. Back at the palace, the gang added the final touches. To make it seem like the party guests had just moved upstairs, they placed leftover bits of cake and drinks on the table and began playing music on the gramophone. With everything in place, Yusupov and Dr. Lazarvert left to pick up Rasputin at around 12:15. 45 minutes later, the gang heard a car pulling into the palace. Yusupov and Rasputin entered the dining room while Dr. Lazarvert joined the rest of the gang upstairs. So far, everything was running on time. For the next half hour, the gang stood at the top of the staircase, trying to listen in to the muffled conversation below. Then, Yusupov ran upstairs with shocking news. Rasputin was not eating or drinking anything. Yusupov returned to the basement. After another half hour, the gang heard 2 corks being popped and the clinking of glasses. It seemed like it was only a matter of time now. But another 30 minutes went by, and the conversation didn't stop. Yusupov rushed upstairs for a second time. Yusupov rejoined his guest and continued to fake pleasant conversation. But with every glass of wine, Rasputin was becoming more impatient, and it seemed like his supernatural powers were somehow overcoming the poison. After another half hour of constant drinking, Yusupov ran upstairs again, this time in desperation. The poison simply wasn't working. An hour had passed. He'd consumed enough cyanide to kill 3 men, and he's still alive, still talking, still laughing. The men looked at each other in disbelief and fear. Their entire plan was falling apart. Without hesitation, Yusupov picked up his pistol and returned to the basement. It didn't take long until the gang heard a loud bang, a gunshot echoing through the palace, and the sound of a body hitting the floor. They rushed downstairs to finally see their enemy lying on the floor. His body was still twitching, and he let out a few weak breaths, but they were sure that Rasputin was finally dead. Without wasting any more time, they turned off the lights and continued following the plan. 3 of the men made their way to Purishkevich's train to start burning the evidence. Since Lieutenant Sukhotin looked the most like Rasputin, he was wearing Rasputin's coat. That way, any spies that were following them might think Rasputin was inside the car. Back at the palace, Yusupov and Purishkevich were trying to process what they had just done. It had taken them longer than expected, but their plan was almost over. But all of a sudden, they heard footsteps coming from downstairs and a door opening. To their amazement and horror, the man they thought was dead was now staggering through the courtyard and headed straight for the exit. Purishkevich grabbed his pistol and chased Rasputin into the courtyard. Just as he was reaching the gate, 2 bullets fired out from Purishkevich's gun, but both missed. 2 pedestrians, who happened to be walking by when Purishkevich began firing, quickly ran off into the night. No matter how hard they tried, it seemed like Rasputin really was invincible. But Purishkevich let out 2 more shots, which finally struck Rasputin in the back, finishing him off. It was now well after 3 in the morning, and the plan had taken a chaotic turn. Rasputin was now lying dead at the gates of the palace, in plain sight for anyone in the street to see. Purishkevich ran back inside and came across 2 soldiers protecting the palace. He told them what happened, and to his relief, They were glad that someone had finally killed Rasputin. The soldiers brought Rasputin's body back inside and wrapped it up in a curtain. Meanwhile, Yusupov was going crazy in another room, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on him. As all of this was happening, a policeman came to the palace and started questioning Purishkevich about the gunshots. Purishkevich calmly said, "We did. We've just killed Rasputin." The policeman paused. "Rasputin? The Rasputin?" And just like that, the police officer was let go. He understood what had been done and why. The rest of the gang returned 5 minutes later, still carrying Rasputin's clothes. As it turned out, the stove on board the train was too small, and Rasputin's coat and shoes didn't fit inside. Nonetheless, the gang had no time to waste. They put Rasputin's wrapped-up body into the back of the car and hit the road. To avoid suspicion, they drove slowly, eventually leaving the city and arriving at the Petrovsky Bridge. Without wasting any more time, they tied some weights to his body and threw him into a hole in the ice, along with his coat and his shoes. It was now 5 in the morning, and the gang finally arrived back to the palace, only to find they had left behind Rasputin's other shoe and bloodstains all over the courtyard. It was simply too late. All the men went back to their homes. Whatever happened next was up to fate. Just 2 days later, blood was discovered on the Petrovsky Bridge, and a boot was found sticking out of the ice. Police began searching down the river and quickly came across Rasputin's body frozen under the ice. There was no hiding who did it. The 5 men had done very little to cover up their crime. Everyone knew where Rasputin was that night. The whole city was talking about it. Despite this, the Tsar thought that arresting any of them might heighten the already tense political scene going on throughout Russia. So instead of justice in the traditional sense, the conspirators faced exile and disgrace. Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, Dr. Lazovert, and Lieutenant Sukhotin eventually left Russia, fleeing the country to escape any further consequences. Vladimir Purishkevich stayed in Russia but died just a few years later, his life cut short by illness. Felix Yusupov, the man behind the whole thing, was exiled and spent the rest of his life in France with his wife Irina, living in comfort but forever marked by what he had done. The death of Rasputin did not save Russia. Within months, the Russian Revolution would begin. The Tsar and Empress would be overthrown, and the entire imperial system would collapse. But Rasputin, the illiterate Siberian peasant, who rose to become the most powerful man in Russia, his story would endure. A story of ambition, corruption, and the strange power that one charismatic man can hold over others, no matter how dangerous, no matter how dark. The most hated man in Russia became, in death, one of history's most unforgettable